Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation Anshe Emet. Joining my good friends, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanofsky, Anshe Chesed, New York City, and Rabbi Barry Chesler, Long Island, Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island. We want to begin first by acknowledging and extending our comfort to our good friend Barry Chesler on the loss of his brother. And we are in the intermediate, kind of strange period now prior to going down to Florida, the funeral, coming back and sitting Shiva next week. But we extend to you our condolences on behalf of the whole community of our Parsha Talk audience. But tell us first your brother's name and a word or two.
So Bruce Evan Chesler, my younger brother, he was 64. Yosef ben Chaim ben Mordechai Miriam. He had been ill for some time, and finally his heart gave out. So his death was not expected, but not surprising either. But a death is still a death. And we heard the news early Sunday morning, and I'm waiting to go down, as you mentioned, later today for the funeral tomorrow.
So we say Hamakom Yinachem. There are different ways to convey comfort, right? We Ashkenazim say Hamakom Yinachem etchem b'toch sha'ar v'lei Tzion Rishalayim. May God comfort you among the mourners of Jerusalem. I always add the mourners of the house of Israel too, because
it's particularly poignant this week of Tisha B'Av to comfort people with the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem.
And we've talked in the past about how Sephardim they come Mina Shamayim Tinuchamu, Jeremy.
Yeah, exactly.
Slightly different.
Short and sweet. Mina Shamayim Tinuchamu, may you be comforted from heaven, is just a human wish. Like, you're in pain, I hope God takes care of you. The other one, those who, the mourners of Zion and
Jerusalem.
Those who mourn in Zion and for Jerusalem, it knits it into this midrashic motif. The midrash says that those who mourn for Jerusalem will be privileged to see it. We'll have the compensation of seeing it rebuilt. Whether that was true for all those many centuries.
Well, that's where you got Karl Reiner's 2,000-year-old man.
He forgot that midrash, but I don't know, for better or for worse, that's a personal story knit into a national story, knit into a mythic theme. I don't know if I like saying the Sephardic version better because it's just so short and sweet.
I agree with you. It's a complicated formula. Especially in our era where we're not exactly. I mean, this is a big Tisha B'Av theme too. It's not exactly that we're mourning the Jerusalem anymore. And you go to Jerusalem, it's the most exhilarating experience. To be in Jerusalem. Now, people aren't mourning Jerusalem, although there's an idea that is there, which is why I like to also say, there are members of the House of Israel who are in mourning now too, for different reasons, all sorts of things. So
right, the traditional formula emphasizes that we're all in mourning.
Yeah.
Right, so you're mourning your loss amidst a lot of other mourners, but I don't know that, especially today, for reasons that you suggest, that it brings comfort. Right, it's supposed to bring comfort, that comment. And instead it kind of puts the mourner in a funny place. So don't talk so much because we're all in the same boat.
Right. Well, all I want to say is we want to comfort you. Even on Zoom, we're far away, and we know that it's a complicated set of days that you have here, especially compounded with Tisha B'Av in the midst of a week of mourning for you. And just I want to turn to anyone who wants to send you condolences. They can turn to your Facebook page. They can write you personally, and just only sweet memories and only comfort. But we have comfort in the amazing Parsha Devarim, which starts a new book. We're starting the 5th final book of the Torah, let's take the 30,000 foot view here of this book before we get into some granular details. What is this book about, and what is going on in this book? And so, Barry, I'm going to turn to you. Start us off with just the the headers or subtitle, if you will, or however you want to shape and frame the book.
So the first thing I think to note is that in Hebrew, we refer to Devarim as Mishneh Torah, the second Torah, because a lot of things that appear in Devarim we've seen before, but nothing is actually repeated. Everything that we think we've seen before is given a twist. So we're talking before the show, we could look at the three historical books, say from Shemot, Exodus, Vayikra, Leviticus, and Numbers as kind of a newspaper version of what's going on. We have the immediacy of events unfolding before our eyes, and Devarim is Moses interpreting that sacred history for a generation that did not live through all of it, because all the adults that left Egypt are now dead, except for Moses, Joshua, and Caleb. And a new generation has come up, and they're going to be the generation that's going to go into the promised land without Moses. He's finally coming to realize that that wish is going to be denied him. And he is trying to fashion a narrative for them that they could take into the land so that they can succeed.
All right, so I want to just focus in on that point because it's really, so we're really at a geographical boundary moment. We're at a temporal boundary moment. It's a transition moment. And I think what I want to focus in on, just to ask you both to reflect on, is the moment when things move from the lived memory to memory, or to the memory that we have to transmit. And if you could reflect on examples that may be part of your own life or our own lives, we're all of a certain generation, which makes us so attractive to so many people. But this whole theme of the transition and transmission. So Jeremy, want to take on this, and is that what's going on here?
Well, so I just will do this with again perhaps a moment of a Tisha B'Av reference. I remember a conversation I once had with the great Yitz Greenberg, tremendous Jewish thinker and writer.
He lives in Jerusalem.
Huh?
He lives in Jerusalem now.
Oh, they're in Jerusalem now?
Yeah.
And a great thinker about Christianity and interfaith work. But one of his great contributions is to put the Shoah at the center of contemporary Jewish thought. And he writes very movingly about his own sort of eye-opening in probably the late 50s, early 60s, in which he realized, oh my gosh, I can't go on any longer basically having ignored this. And I asked him one time, whether he thought the Shoah would one day be knit into a narrative, history in the way that Tisha B'Av has been knit into a narrative history and given a kind of meaning. So Tisha B'Av, it's the story of destruction of two temples, and lots of other bad things happened in the course of the summer months. Spanish expulsion and crusade stuff, and so we as Jews have a way of talking about Av as the place where all these bad things happen. And what does our Talmudic tradition say? There's a meaning to this. It is, there's a meaning to this destruction. It is about our, following the letter of the law and not caring about people, says one midrash, or sinat chinam, and the stories of just pointless, meaningless hatred and rivalry for one another. And it's also, the Mashiach is going to be born on Tisha B'Av afternoon, and so from the depths of, like I was saying about mourning for Zion and Jerusalem, we've knitted into a story that is not meaningless. That is meaningful. It makes sense. It tells us something about how we should go on living. And I asked Yitz Greenberg whether he thought that would ever happen to the Shoah, and he said, I certainly hope not. Right? I certainly hope it does not become a trope about, we had to do tshuva and then we had to change. I mean, we all know that certainly for, as a little dicey thing to say, I'm sure that the Zionists did everything they could to save every Jewish life. And they sort of proved their point that the diaspora had to end and people had to come to the land of Israel. And that was part of the story that they told about the Shoah. Okay, all that's the Tisha B'Av, part of this. But Moshe is giving them a way to think about these events. They didn't experience them. if you didn't experience the event, they may just be a fact about the past without particular meaning. But if I tell you a story in which it locates it in a value pattern, not just a fact pattern, and makes you think about your own life, then that's what it's kind of all about. I said before we started talking on the recording that to me, one of the themes of this book, it appears, this Parsha, it appears at least 3 times in Moses' speech, is don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of the Canaanites, and don't be afraid of to the judges. He says, don't be intimidated by the people in your courtroom. And I think that Moses is telling them a story, is knitting these things into a story about bravery or fearlessness or courage. I guess courage is the better word than fearlessness. Fearlessness is like stupidity, but courage is being able to, keep your stuff together even when you are afraid. Like he's telling them a story about, you've got a job to do. We're almost there, but you can't be intimidated. You got to be courageous.
I think.
So
go ahead, Greg.
You have to add, there's a transformation in the course of the book to your words, Jeremy, because the commands not to be afraid will become, in I think Parshat Vayelech, the positive command, Chazak v'amatz, that it's not just about being afraid, it's about doing something positive to strengthen oneself and be courageous, I think is one way to translate it, because we begin telling ourselves not to be afraid, but we have to get to a positive formulation if we're truly to conquer our fear, I think.
So what I want to say is that this is it's a long set of speeches, right? And if you do the real granular look at this, these are speeches given over several days, several weeks even, and I love the idea that Moses was told at the end of the book of Bamidbar to avenge the Midianites, and then you're going to die. And of course, it's close to a month later, and he wants to hold on a lot. But this is, the question that I have is he stalling here, or is he rebuking? And if he's rebuking, what is it that we want? There's a certain conflict, I would say, with the sensibilities that let's say we would have. What would we expect if we were the speechwriters for Moses writing his valedictory speeches here? How would we want to do this? And does he succeed, or I would ask, does he even fail at convincing the people to do the things that, to love God, to fear God, which are the central themes of Deuteronomy? I have to say, it's based on I guess the Shema, which would be one of the central passages in Deuteronomy. Love the Lord your God. That's a theme that is repeated many, many times. Does this work? Do these speeches work? Is it too brazen to ask that question?
Well, if one yardstick about whether they worked is whether we still preserve and care about and are kind of passionately attached to the words, then yeah.
Okay. So
3,000 years later, whatever it is.
Yeah, but that's a function of religion, not necessarily the power of the.
So I think we have to start with your comment. If we were speechwriters, could we do better? And I think for those who love puns, I include myself in that number, the only thing that really surpasses Deuteronomy is Deutero-Isaiah. And I think that, this really is a magnificent achievement. And I think it's best understood not as a stalling device in that Moses is trying to prolong his life to the last drop, but Moses is finally taking into account that there is going to be a life beyond him, and he has to take part in that to the best that he can by admonishing and teaching the people what they're going to need to do when he is gone. And that, I think, is the way I understand Sefer Devarim.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. I think Sefer Devarim, first of all, they're speak about granular and stuff. Our listeners all know that in the with some medieval and even ancient precedents, anybody reading the Bible like really closely, okay, I'm not telling you you can't have faith that God wrote the Torah, but then you do have to explain some of the anomalies, like Moses' death at the end, the final 12 verses of the Torah, which the rabbis say, God dictated and Moses wrote it in his tears. But Ibn Ezra has a list of, I think he cites 10 or 12 verses in which he thinks, they couldn't have been really, they couldn't really be Mosaic. They indicate a time that is different than Moses' time, and he includes the first lines of Devarim in that category. So you do see a human hand, but any reader of the Torah, even apart from the question of that in the 19th century, people noticed that the book doesn't all look exactly coherent. That Vayikra looks really kind of different from Shemot, which looks certainly different from Bereshit, but Deuteronomy looks the most different of them all. And it's got its own set of vocabulary, and it's got its own rhetorical style. There is no Vaydaber Adonai al Moshe Lemor in the whole book. It's all this first person speech of Moshe. And as Barry, was pointing at, the rhetoric, the beauty of the language, the poetic quality, it's simply amazing. And there are plenty of laws that appear only in Devarim. And yeah, I think that Devarim shaped the religious content of Judaism. I mean, the fact that we say Shema every day, and the fact that we say Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor V'Hadorah, I mean, this is Deuteronomy brought to life in the practice of every Jew. So I feel like the answer is a pretty, not just did it work because we do in fact still read it and repeat it. That's also true of Vayikra, which is maybe a little more foreign, but Deuteronomy, I think, is a huge impact overall in shaping what, how Moshe Rabbeinu has taught us to be Jews.
It's so interesting, he has to, in a way, sum up a 40-year career and even sum up a life, and it's an incredible life, and there are important themes in these speeches, and there are important kind of moments and hints, to Moses' character. We cannot overlook the irony that Moses enters the stage saying Lo ish dvarim, Anochi, I'm not a person of words, and then it's Ve'ela hadvarim. It's a whole book of words. There's just an implicit irony in the way that Moses, who is so afraid of talking, now can't stop talking. It's like, I always joke about the book of Dvarim that there must have been people in the audience going like, like they do sometimes for us when we
Kiddush.
Kiddush, this thing, Rabbi, it takes about 3 hours to read the book, and there we get a glimpse of anger, maybe we get a glimpse of his love, we get a glimpse of certain passions, we get, I can't escape thinking about, he says, Adonai Elohechem hirba etchem v'hinchem hayom kechochvei hashamayim la'arav. He's saying God has made you increase. Let's see. This is right at the beginning of the speech. He's saying, look, I can't take you on by myself. God has made you numerous people. And then the next verse is, Adonai Elohei avotechem Yosef aleichem elef pa'amim. May God make you increase. In other words, it's like, God made you a great nation, and you should only be a great nation. I hear a kind of fatherly, sentiment in Moses that he only wants the best for the people, and yet there's plenty of admonishment. There's not, it's not disguised, the anger, and then of course, and we'll probably get into this next week, the total frustration of not being allowed to enter the land. I can't escape reading this whole book with that lingering feeling that man, I can't do this, and you're going to get into the land that I want to go into so much, and I'm not allowed, and it's frustration. I don't think even though we're getting ahead of ourselves, he doesn't accept that. There's no acceptance of this in Moses. I don't know. Do you agree with me or no?
I think it's a bitter pill to swallow when you come so close to reaching your goal and you're told that you can't reach it, that's very hard to take. But what I would add to what you said, Elliot, is that what becomes clear, I think, in Devarim is this image of Moshe Rabbeinu, that Moses here is a teacher. And in the other books, he's a leader for sure, a politician, a general of sorts, I suppose, although more like the
Legislator?
president, the civilian authority, not the military authority. But he now is teaching the people. And one of the things I think that's useful to do sometimes is to imagine that we were with Bnei Yisrael listening to Moses. And, we know it was only 150 years ago, the Lincoln Douglas debates, people would listen for 3 or 4 hours at a time to someone talk. That was their entertainment. But here, I think what we have with Moses is a teachable moment.
It's
I want to go the other way, actually, because we talked about this a couple weeks ago when God says to Moses, you're gonna die, and when Joshua's going to be the new leader, Moses actually begs God for a person of spirit who will be able to do this. Isha Ruach Bo, who's got a good spirit within that person. And God says, put your hand on Joshua, and Moses puts his 2 hands. And that is read in the rabbinic tradition as, Moses didn't have jealousy of Joshua. He just, with full heart, wanted him to be his successor. And to me, we have in this, we have the great midrash of Moses trying to persuade God not to end his life. And so that frustration of mortality, that frustration of the unfulfilled ambition, the frustration of coming so close, something so close and still so far out of reach, says the great late Tom Petty. But I want to read it as a recognition of mortality. This is life, Rabotai, Gbirotai. Ladies and gentlemen, this is life. You work hard. You can see the future. You can't have the future. Everybody dies with unfulfilled ambition and unfulfilled hopes. And there's just a limit. 120 is like the speed of light. You don't get more. And I like to read Moshe as in fact embodying that knowledge of the limitations of nature, of physicality, of mortality, and looking, putting with two hands on Joshua's head that he has the future.
Yeah, it's interesting how that connects back to Breshit, where the allotment of a person's life is 120. And Moses lives up to that. Exactly. I want to explore a verse at the beginning of the parsha. It says, "Be'ever ha'Yarden be'eretz Moav, hu'il Moshe be'er et haTorah hazot lemor." So across from the Jordan, in the land of Moab, Moses began to be'er, explain this Torah saying. So in addition to the puzzle of who's writing this and what's the vantage point, it's and I think Ibn Ezra, as you mentioned, raises that possibility. Only someone from inside the land can be writing about a place outside the land. But I want to focus in on this word be'er et Torah. Be'er means to explain, and I'm inspired by Rashi's comment on this, which is that Moses speaks in 70 languages here, right? And that's based on a nice convoluted midrashic reading of this be'er and another time that the word be'er occurs in the Torah, and that they make the connection that it's 70 languages. And of course, the commentaries on Rashi say, like, well, what's the point? Why does he need to speak in 70 languages? The Israelites are only speaking in one language. Why does he need to speak in 70 languages? And they say it's not really 70 languages he is using, it's 70 intentions or 70 meanings. And this opens up to this rich theme that Shivim Panim LaTorah, that there's so many ways, and that everything is delivered here in this speech, and that from this verse and many verses similar to this, we get an idea of the multiplicity of interpretive vantage points on the Torah, and I think what the opening, the license for, let's say, the three of us, but everyone who is watching and listening us as well. You have your right. You have a position. You have a perspective that is already placed at the beginning. I don't know if you want to kind of relate or reflect on this theme, Shivim Panim LaTorah, Jeremy or Barry.
Okay, so I think that when we think of the Torah, Moses speaking in 70 languages, the intent is to make the Torah universal. It's for everyone. But when we say that the Torah has Shivim Panim, 70 faces, it means that each individual finds his or her own meaning. And this is an important lesson for a teacher because we don't reach each student in the same way. And we have to be prepared to reach each student in a way that makes whatever we're teaching accessible to that person. And Moses's job is not just to teach Bnei Israel as a collective, but also as individuals. And therefore, he's expounding the Torah because there's a multiplicity of meanings for the large crowd that is before him.
For sure. And I think one of the hallmarks of rabbinic literature is to feel that the Torah is like inexhaustibly meaningful. That there's all kinds of stuff between the lines and below the surfaces. And everything Barry said is 100% correct. Shivim Lashon, the mythic 70 languages of the earth, means humanity in its universality. I think we could talk about whether or not the Torah really envisions other nations becoming part of Israel or just admiring Israel, that everybody has to have, his or her own relationship to the Torah, and it speaks to them in their own way. But I also think another meaning of Shivim Panim LaTorah, Ho'il Moshe Be'eret Torah Azot, Moses begins to, he starts to expound it, is because that is not a, finishable task, right? He's beginning the exposition, and you cannot fail to recognize, even though Ba'er in this sentence is the verb to explain, it sounds like Ba'er, the word well. Like there's deep water in the well, and he's pulling the bucket up. He's taking more and more water out of the well, and he's the first. That's why he's Moshe Rabbeinu. He's the first of the rabbis to take this text and expound the hidden meaning. And we remain his students.
I want to go back to the idea of languages. Having grown up in a different country where they actually speak more than one language, it was very common in Canada to hear public pronouncements in English and in French, and to move seamlessly between the two languages. If you watch speeches in the parliament, or if you watch other kinds of public presentations, they're always done in English and in French, almost equally. Maybe not, maybe a little more in English. The point is that it comes out a little differently in French, whatever is being said, because that's what language is. Language always gives you a different kind of nuance, whether it's the music of the language, the accent of the language, or the experience of the language. It's interesting. We read the Torah in Hebrew, and we chant the Torah, and we listen to the Torah, and we're always, we're talking and speaking in English, and of course it comes out differently. If we were doing this Parsha talk in Hebrew as native Israelis, this would be a totally different experience, it would be akin to eating a different kind of food. Really, you get a different set of nuances and meaning, and okay, so the idea that the entire people is speaking different languages, that doesn't make much sense, because the people there are have one language, although in their tribes, in their families, they may have small nuances and dialects, but the idea that we speak Torah in actually different languages and actually mean things. And look, you can pull up. I have, like you do. I have 16 translations of the Torah right in front of me in my library. Each one is, pulls out a different meaning. I have Everett Fox here, the JPS, the old JPS, the new JPS. They're all different there because they pull out different things. And of course, once you get into the world of Parshanut and commentaries, it's endless. It's really endless. So the question then is, are the rabbis trying to say this is the experience? The experience is, well, conversation, talking, the translating it into different languages that are meaningful to you.
You have to add one more thing here, which is that the ancient, everything you said is very, illuminating and right on point. We're always going to add one more point to it. The ancient Torah reading itself included a Targum.
Yes.
Like somebody read Hebrew,
yeah.
And then somebody else had an official, our Onkelos is thought to be like the official Babylonian translation that they used to translate it into Aramaic. Because even though Hebrew and Aramaic, to my eyes, are pretty close, the people, that was vernacular for the people. So it's like as if you had a running translation of Shakespeare. Like, it's English, but it's not my English. So I need somebody to explain it a little bit.
That's a great, yeah.
So throughout Jewish history, there have been different vernacular languages that have dominated. So when Rambam was writing and the poets of medieval Spain, they wrote a fair amount in Arabic. And some of Rambam's most important works are actually in Arabic. Today we use English. One of the things I often find amusing, I like to use Rinat Yisrael, the Siddur from the land of Israel, and they translate all the Aramaic portions, which used to be understood as a native language, back into Hebrew, so that the native Hebrew speaker can translate it. All of Rambam's great works, only scholars read them in Arabic. Almost everyone else reads them in a translation into Hebrew.
So,
and
go ahead.
There's a great story, I think, about Saul Bellow, famous English writer, French Canadian Eliot, and homage to you, of course. And someone asked him when he in Israel, when his books were coming out in Hebrew, he said, something to the fact that, what do I need to have them come out in Hebrew? I write in English. He says, because they won't last until they're in Hebrew.
That story is that Agnon congratulated Bellow when a translation of his translation into Hebrew of, I guess, probably Augie March or whatever, one of the novels. He said, "Congratulations, now you will last."
It's so fascinating. Lachine, Quebec, by the way, is where he's born. But okay, so I, and here I know we're kind of running out of time, but I want to say that there are different ways to experience the Torah. On the basic level of language, there are different ways to experience the Torah, whether it is chanting in the synagogue, whether it's reading it from a text, or I have to share with you this experience. I do the 929 project, which I recommend to everybody. It's beautiful, parakut of Tanakh a day, and I've gotten into the habit of putting it on my iPhone and listening to it being read. And the reader is such an amazing reader, Omer Frankel. Such a beautiful, beautiful way of reading. I have to tell you, I learn things from the way he reads the verse. Kulanu chachamim, kulanu nevonim. We think we're so smart, but just to pick up the text and to read it with just a little pause, a little bit of, emphasis, a little bit of a question in the voice. And that's different from chanting. It's different from, what Jeremy, you learned the Parsha last week, right? There's an intense involvement when you learn to read the Torah, chanting it. There's no question about how intimate that is, and we could spend a lot of time talking about it. But what I'm trying to say is that there are so many ways to experience the Torah, not just only visually by reading the text, not only in the synagogue by listening to the Torah reading, and not only by reading translations. Try reading it with 15 translations, with 2 translations, and and this is, maybe you can refer back to the Buber Rosenzweig translation in German, which also try to elicit another sense, another face to the Torah. Barry.
So what I would add, our teacher and colleague Bert Vazosky used to urge people all the time to actually listen to the Torah reading in shul and not to follow along with a Chumash, which is
Absolutely.
our custom because we're readers and not listeners. But the other idea that comes to mind, and this may have been Vazaski's as well, is one year in my synagogue for Rosh Hashanah, we used the Targum verse by verse, only we translated it into English. And it's a very powerful experience to hear the Torah read out loud, both in Hebrew and in English, because suddenly most people understand what's being said. And that also gives us an access that sometimes when we read or chant in Hebrew, we don't get.
You want to know another technique? And I learned this. I remember learning this many years ago, but I just saw it somewhere. Put your own name in the verse. Okay, so for example, Ele Hadvarim, Elliot, Asher Diber Moshe El Kol Yisrael, Elliot, Be'ever HaYarden B'Midbar. I mean, once you put your name in there in the
Speaking to you.
spaces,
Yeah.
it's a different experience. In other words, it's saying it's talking to me. It's talking to me. And of course, it's talking to everybody that's listening to us, especially our good friends at Machane Ramah in the Berkshires. We are so glad that you were able to spend time with us. I don't know if you have a concluding word there, Jeremy, another word, or Elad Varim, Jeremy.
I think this is our longest episode, so
wait.
The last word are words, Devarim.
Yeah. Thank you all for watching, for listening. We really appreciate your spending the time with us. We enjoy your comments, and we hope to see you next week on another edition of Parasha Talk. You want to write to Barry Chesler and offer condolences again on the Facebook page. We'll see you again. Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.